Hello and welcome back to OT the podcast. We're here to talk about watches, time, doing crime, and how to avoid getting caught. My name's Felix Schultz.
I love it, Felix. Andy Green here. How are you?
Look, anything you've heard that I've done, I haven't done, and I was never there.
Plausible deniability. You naughty man. What are we doing this week?
We're chatting to one of the coolest, a very sort of interesting watchmaker. A guy named Joshua Shapiro from J.N. Shapiro Watches. No surprises where he got that name from. But Joshua Shapiro is a pretty exciting engine turner or guilloché expert that's making some very interesting watches and surprisingly making them in California, which isn't what you expect.
He is. He's been having a bit of a moment, which we think, having spoken to him, is only going to increase.
Momentum.
Momentum is picking up. He's got a lot of steam. Really cool dude to talk to. Young as well. Not what I was expecting at all. I don't think I'd ever spoken to him on Instagram or anything before, Felix. I know you had, and I know a couple of our friends have recommended we have him on for a little while now. Yep. But really pleasant surprise, J.N. Shapiro, and his watches are beautiful.
Yeah, quite stunning. And I think, I've just been doing some other writing around his stuff, and I think it really is like brands like this are sort of the future, like smaller artists. I mean, it is the future on one hand, but also they've always existed, but he's outside of that sort of Swiss mainstream, mentality, like all these guys that, went to school together and have worked at the same companies. So he comes at it from a slightly different perspective, and I think it's fair. Like he sees himself in the school of sort of Daniels and Roger Smith, and they've both come with that sort of slight outsider take, and I think it's relevant, and I think it's cool, and there's a real sort of energy around American watchmaking at the moment, and Shapiro.
Well, before that, Felix, what have you been up to?
A few things. I've got some. I've got a fact. I've got the random fact that we have to get to in a second, as mandated by Discord. In the last few weeks, we've talked about Disney.
Yes,
I'm going to take a break from the Disney this time.
Yep.
But I do want to talk about a little discussion that was happening on Discord just this morning, and I think it's really interesting, and I want to see what you think about it, and maybe what people listening think about it. We were talking about Zenith, who recently released their sort of third in the Lupin the Third manga-inspired watches. This one had a really quite unique dial that was basically 50-50 the dial from the previous two. So they literally split it down the middle and contrast.
Diagonally, though.
Yeah. And that had some big feelings from people. But the sort of the uptake of that is that a lot of people in the chat seem to think that Zenith is really quite cool at the moment, and they've got some momentum, much like J.N. Shapiro, and they're doing hit after hit with these limited editions and collaborations, and they've done stuff with numerous media companies. They're really kicking it hard at the moment.
Consistent, I think was the word used,
and that sort of begs the question: who's next? Like if Zenith is the LVMH group that's getting that big push at the moment, who's got to be the next big thing?
Yeah, I jumped in and I kind of said, is it going to be IWC? Are they going to pull their finger out this year and do an ingenieur that makes sense and lean on that and then use that to do some incredible things? If you recall, we did speak to Chris Granger in 2021 and I think we teased it out of him and he said it was coming, but he wouldn't commit to exactly when that was. So that could be this year.
So it's Christmas, but
So it's Christmas. Well, it would make a lot of sense for IWC. The other interesting one, which you've pointed out, Felix, Tag Heuer.
I think I'm less pushy on Tag. I think for me, I think it's quite a deliberate strategy within the LVMH group to sort of give the brands a bit of time. Like Tag's had a lot of focus. Hublot certainly had a lot of focus, but I think they're investing in building Zenith as a brand at the moment. So, but the one I think that's interesting and has potential is Girard-Perregaux. Like we're starting to see like cool people in that sort of influencer space. Like look at the Laureato again, and of course I think it's capitalizing. Inadvertently. It's a design that's been around for a while. From that sort of popularity of things like the Royal Oak and Nautiluses that have a similar sort of design identity. But I don't necessarily think that Girard Perregaux has its ducks in a row from the marketing
Mm.
point of view to make it happen. Like,
Nah.
I don't think they've got the infrastructure to really do that sustained push to make it,
What about Chopard?
They had a moment, but I think they sort of maybe lost it. Like the Alpine
Yeah,
Eagle was the time.
I'm still seeing it. I'm seeing it a little bit more. And when these watches pop up in Netflix series and the Netflix produced stuff, the Netflix originals, that's when I start to think, this is hitting the masses, and people will pay a bit of attention to these models and start, looking up what they were. There was a bit of a show party in Succession season 3, right?
There was Morning Wars. I didn't see any show part in Succession.
A lot of Cartier in Succession.
Yeah, Cartier, Patek, a bit of RWC.
Mm.
Again, I just don't think they've got. And this is not my area of expertise. I just don't think they have the sophisticated marketing that the big groups have.
You think Zenith is going to keep the momentum?
Yeah, and Richemont's the other one. Like, I mean, you talk RWC, and I think there's a few brands in there that they could do it, but I just think they flop and change their collection focus so much. Like, or this, I don't know. There's something in the corporate structure that doesn't lend it to doing it. But maybe I'm just looking at it from a really sort of jaded point of view. Like, can you imagine which brand can you imagine doing cool collaborations with? I don't know, like not Hodinkee or not like a media, but like maybe doing I don't know, it's like some legitimately cool artist, or like dropping a collaboration with like Greg Una that we chatted to last week. That sort of like actual cool stuff.
The chops to actually pull something off. Yeah, I think
Yeah.
there's a size thing to it, or a dominance within the group to be able to say, yeah, we are going to do this.
IWC could, but I think they've sort of got a strategy that they're sticking to. Tudor, I don't think would. Like they're going that sort of big.
GP fits though. GP fits when you talk about it from that angle. Like they could very easily jump on an amazing opportunity like that.
And I'm amazed. And maybe look, I mean, if the Kering Group, I don't know what their sort of structure's like, but like let's get some Balenciaga hype GPs out there.
Yeah. Or get it in some, some Netflix stuff. Like, I mean, it's so close, especially the Laureato, like it's so close to those icons, and it's a nice looking watch, and there's so much variety in there that you could deck a whole cast and crew out with, variations on the Laureato now, because there's so much variety, and have people really talking. Like, that would be cool.
I think if two I think that could, from very, very different points of view, sort of make that jump into cool. Hermes, if Hermes was a watch brand that just focused on stuff like the HO8, I think they could do some cool stuff, but I don't think they care enough. Like it's not a big enough part of it. They don't need to grow it. And the other one that's kind of cool, like, and I think they've benefited from being at the right place at the right time, is Icopod.
Yeah. Well, what did you send me the other day?
They've done a shoe. They've done like 200 shoes.
Yeah.
Randomly. Like, and they sort of have like strong Kickstarter vibes. And I think they're hampered in some ways, I think, because Apple has some of that IP, and I don't know, like they don't have 100% of their historical stuff. And they're at a price point where they can't make those super complicated chronographs. But I think there could be some, if I was an investor that like cared about watches and wanted to build up a brand, Icopod would be a great option.
Yep, especially with all the different, people talking about the OG models. So cool. Well, what's your random fact?
Do you know who? Apologies to any Russian speakers. Sergei Krikalev is?
No.
He is sometimes referred to as the last Soviet citizen. Can you guess why he might have been the last Soviet citizen?
No.
Because when the Soviet Union fell apart in 1991, he was on the Mir space station.
Okay.
So when he went up, Baikonur was in the Soviet Union. When he came down, it was in another country. I'm going to say Kazakhstan. Yes, in Kazakhstan. So he was sort of like this low-key political concern. Like, he went up, Soviet Union came down. What would it look like for this new nation of Kazakhstan to have like a Soviet rocket landing there? And like there was, so what they did, they just kept him up there for a couple of 100 days extra and worked
I
it
did
out.
read about this at some point. Yeah,
Um,
fascinating.
yeah, just a weird little fact. What's his name? Sergei Krikalev. Just imagine that. Just imagine like being like the stress of not knowing if you were going to get down or when or how.
Yeah.
That must have been a rough day at the office.
I mean, interesting that they have 100 days of extra food for old Sergio.
Well, maybe they sent it up. I don't know. Like I'm sure there was some logistics up there, but yeah.
Rations, half size, half
So
meals.
he has spent a total of 803 days in space.
Oof, it's a long time in space.
That will have done some stuff to his bones.
Speaking of doing stuff to my bones, you messaged me the other morning and you said, "Watches of Espionage." Did a Hodinky article. It's one of my favorite pieces that I've read in a long time.
Yeah.
Have you read it yet, Andy? I said no, but it's bookmarked. I wouldn't read it, Felix. Great article.
Thanks, man. I like
Really
to think that
interesting.
I had nothing to do with it.
No. For those who haven't, we will link it up. But it is, it's titled "A Former CIA Case Officer Reveals the Surprising Connection Between Watches and Espionage." Now, he started off as an Instagram account that's obviously caught a lot of attention, got a lot of followers, gets a lot of engagement because his take on watches is, I think, new to social media.
It's not new. Like we've always heard about spy watches and stuff, but this is like legitimate. Like he's
Like talking about it though, in
yeah,
a legit way.
authoritative way.
Yeah,
not like James Bond.
Exactly. So he posts his everyday carry or what he would wear and what watch he would wear, and
and he's got all those cool like random Syria
coins,
intelligent group mission patches and
medallions and coins.
Yeah, all the paraphernalia of military gear.
Yeah, so this is a really good article. It's long form, very impressive for someone who's not a writer to put it all together. And
I mean, how do you know he's not a writer? You don't know what this guy does.
You don't even know who it is.
Mm-hmm.
And I love that. Something you pointed out as well was that the article was cleared by the CIA's Special Activities Center.
Sure.
Or it's their classification review board to prevent the disclosure of classified info. So no leaks in it. But
yep, make us look good. Don't tell them anything they can't know.
Yeah, don't tell them anything they can't Google. Which is cool. So very fascinating. Highly recommend you check out the article and check out Watches of Espionage on Instagram.
Another excellent thing about that article that I don't know if you would have noticed is the comments.
Oh, the comments section, yeah.
Like where there's all these guys like going, "Oh no, spies would never wear Panerai," and like then everyone's going, "This former spy literally said he wore a Panerai." So
yeah, I know. There are some great comments on there. We won't ruin any more for you, but
the comments will ruin you.
Equally as enjoyable. Alrighty, Felix. Well, we need to take a quick break.
Oh, before we do, so the ad read is going to be from our sponsors, Artem, Andy, as you well know, who have, since we've recorded that, they've released their strapless deployant sailcloth strap, which looks very slick. We'll have to check it out up close and personal at some point in the future. But yeah, let's find out about them.
Sweet.
And now, Andy, time to have a quick chat about this week's sponsor, Artem Strap.
Let's get right into it. Australia's own Artem makes some of the best sailcloth straps we've seen, period.
Sailcloth straps are great. They offer a casual look and they won't get ruined by water. Too often I find they're cheap, perhaps even downright nasty, or that they come on like super high-end pieces that are brand specific. Artem offers something different. They're supple right out of the box and the finish is excellent and they have a feel on the wrist that I find lovely. I currently have an Artem strap on my Bremont as well as my Nomos Ahoy, and I have not taken them off since I got them. Andy, what makes a great sailcloth strap?
That's a good question, Felix. There is a bit of a secret sauce in Artem straps, but we do know that they have a synthetic upper with an underside that is a mix of cowhide sealed with rubber to provide a smooth and water-resistant seal on the surface that touches your wrist. These high-quality materials and the attention to detail mean that it has a really pleasing satin sheen that conforms well on the wrist and, offers that water resistance.
It's the smooth underside that sells it for me, Andy. Artem currently offer black straps with white, grey, or black stitching in widths from 19 millimeters all the way up to 23. So that's 19, 20, 21, 22, and 23 millimeters, as well as a few lengths. they have some exciting updates in development too. Stay tuned for those.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing what Artem do in 2022. But Felix, do not forget the buckles. They offer a few different buckle styles which live up to that same quality we've mentioned of the straps, and that includes a really solid deploying option.
Yeah, speaking of the deployments, bit of a new thing out of the gate for them. Check out the new style sailcloth that is reminiscent of Amiga's canvas strap. Comes with no keepers, which a lot of people will like, and that makes it tailor-made for that deployant buckle.
Love it. To find out more about Artem's wonderful sailcloth straps, head to artemstraps.com. That is ARTEM straps.com.
Love it, Andy. Let's get back to the show. Andy, if you've ever wanted to know what it's like to engrave a meteorite, we're about to
I have.
find out.
Oh, can't wait. Let's do it. Let's get Jay and Shapiro on the phone.
Bring, bring. Andy, today's guest is a bit of an unlikely watchmaker. His name is Josh Shapiro, and he has a background as a school teacher and an educator who decided somewhere along the line to move into traditional guilloche making, watch dials and watches. So that's not, normal, maybe. But what sets him apart from this is the fact that he's also based in sunny Los Angeles. Welcome to the podcast, Josh Shapiro of J and Shapiro.
Thank you
Welcome.
guys for having me. Thank you.
It's
I
our
always
pleasure.
like being described as not normal.
Yeah, in retrospect, maybe not the best way.
It's
to
a compliment
introduce
from
you.
Felix. That's a compliment from Felix.
Yeah, I'm used to it. I'm used to it. It's fine.
Me too. Josh, how did you get into watchmaking?
Well, it started as a hobby about 10 years ago. And before that, I kind of grew up around a machine shop. My father and grandfather were machinists and owned a machine shop business. And so I grew up around it, but then went into education history specifically, and then became a principal of a school. And watchmaking was just the hobby. But slowly it grew and grew and grew until it took over. And this is the first school year where I haven't been a principal for a school or an educator in about 18 years.
Yeah,
Very
right.
cool.
And so, what was that early moment of sort of discovery of watches being something a little bit more than a device to tell the time?
Oh yeah, so for me it was my wife had bought me a watch when we got married, and I needed to get the band adjusted. And I went into Feldmar, which is a high end fine watch store here in Los Angeles, and they had a big giant poster of the Chrono Swiss Opus, this skeletonized chronograph, and I just stared at it for a while and never realized the complexities of a watch before. And from that moment on, I just started learning as much as I possibly could. And my first adventures into watchmaking was skeletonizing watches. And, I couldn't comprehend why anybody would ever want to put a dial on a watch. I thought the inside of a watch was so beautiful. Why not be able to see it from the front and the back? But that was my first taste, and it's been a love story ever since.
Amazing. And so I might have not caught it, but you've got any professional training in watchmaking?
Yeah, so I took a distance learning course with the British Horological Institute. I did that for a year. And for engine turning, there's no such thing as any
Okay.
professional. It's all self-taught. There's no schools for this.
And that's sort of something I think that maybe certainly I'm guessing quite a few of the listeners want to know a little bit more about. What do you mean when you're talking about engine turning in that sense? What is it?
Yeah, so engine turning is the English word. Guilloché is the French word. But essentially, it's geometric patterns engraved into metal. There's a whole nother sister community called ornamental turning, which is cutting into wood. And they use similar machines, but engine turning and guilloché specifically refer to geometric shapes into metal. And there are two machines that do this. One is a straight line machine,
Yep.
and that does vertical and horizontal lines. And then another machine is a Rose engine machine, which does circular or concentric lines.
Yeah, right.
Go ahead, yeah.
No, so I'm just because I'm curious about the line work. Obviously, it's done by hand, and I'm guessing these are some sort of stamping machines. But how do you get such straight lines in such small detail? Because with any sort of even modern machining, this wouldn't be possible. So I'm guessing the only way to do this is with some sort of hand machine.
Yeah, so there's a cutter,
Uh-huh.
a very sharp cutting tool that engraves into the metal, and that's guided by rosettes or pattern bars.
Mm-hmm.
In many ways, it's a cam, and we're tracing the pattern onto the metal from this cam that has the shape on it. And so the better those cams are, they're called rosettes or pattern bars. The better those are, the sharper and more crisp the lines are. Modern mass production techniques take these, like someone will engrave a pattern on a piece of steel and then turn that into a die, or the other way is that it'll be done with a CNC machine. But the most traditional way is to do it with the rose engine or straight line machine, and that's you're doing it one at a time, one dial at a time, one line at a time, with a combination of the pressure of your hand and the precision of the machine.
And what's the appeal of doing it by hand? I mean, obviously, if you're doing a CNC or stamping it, you can do a lot more. What does doing it by hand add?
Yeah, I think the best comparable is to an original painting versus
Mm-hmm.
a copy of it. Like an original Mona Lisa. There's a
Versus like a
ton of
print.
value there in that original piece, and you can find prints all over the world, and there's not much special about a print, and that sort of CNC or stamping is just sort of an imitation of the real thing. So my customers and other customers with real hand guilloché, they know that someone was sitting there putting their life force into this style, making this pattern.
Hmm.
And it may not be precision perfect, but that's because there's a human element to it.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, these styles are stunning, and check out your Instagram. Definitely to kind of have a look at what we're talking about here if you haven't already, guys. But you mentioned just before that the reason you got into movement, into watches, was the movements, and here we are talking about these amazing dials that you do, and arguably, what you really have become famous for. Do you think that there's too much of a focus, particularly from perhaps watch enthusiasts, on the mechanism of a watch and not enough attention to the dial?
Well, I think it's really both.
Mm-hmm.
There's very few people out there that are gonna buy a watch if the dial is hideous, even if the movement is beautiful. It's just it's a package. It's one watch, and the dial is a watch part of it. But the dial just provides a wonderful canvas to do a lot of different things. And I have always been drawn to high detail, and guilloche really fills that desire within me to express myself in a highly detailed way. Uh, in my infinity weave, the pattern I invented that goes in the subdial, it was me trying to really like push the boundaries as far as I could for doing absolutely micro guilloche and see
Mm.
what I could accomplish. And I think for any watch collector, like there's been a lot of focus on movements for the last decade or so, and I'm happy that people appreciate my dials and spend a lot of time enjoying that aspect of the watch.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about your infinity weave because obviously it's quite special and really stunning if you look at it in those macro photos. How often is it done where someone just sort of comes up with a new pattern? Like off the top of my head, I can maybe think of barley corn engine turning and I don't know Audemars Piguet's tapisserie and maybe one or two others.
Mm.
Is it something anyone can do, or is this quite a big deal?
Yeah, so there's with the machines, it's almost infinite the number of patterns you can come up with. It's just not all of them will look good.
Sure.
like you know, like it, some patterns will just look like scribbles on a dial. Other patterns will be so busy that they're distracting from time telling itself. So it's not only coming up with a pattern, but coming up with a pattern that will look really nice. And I also wanted to come up with something that would sort of matched the very classical aesthetic that I enjoyed, which was the basket weave specifically. So this is just a basket weave within a basket weave. So I guess the real wow is the technical aspect of trying to fit tiny baskets into a basket. And that just took a lot of research and development and time and messing up and uh, getting really, really, really frustrated and then trying again and again and again and again and finally getting it.
Yeah, I mean that's. I think the pictures online I've seen look absolutely stunning, and that's something that you should be proud of. Where do you sort of see yourself, particularly in relation to the guilloche side of things, sitting um, in that? When I think of guilloche, I think of breguet, both modern and back in the day, as well as Daniels and sort of Roger Smith as being that sort of big exponents of traditional classical
Mm.
watchmaking. Do you
Mm-hmm.
see yourself in that same sort of school?
Yeah, for sure. So a big part of watches for me is the history of them. I have a undergraduate and master's in history, and I really love the history of watchmaking and, of course, the history of Breguet. He wasn't the first to use engine turning on the dial, but he definitely popularized it.
Hmm.
And many people have liked that aesthetic and used it in their watches. And I guess most famously recently is George Daniels, and his work really inspired me. I like that aesthetic is timeless,
Yeah.
and it's popular now, and it was popular 200 years ago. And there's very few things in arts that are like that, where you look at it and it's interesting then and it's interesting now and it's still fresh. That's very, very, very uncommon. And I have a feeling there's a lot of watch designs today that may not be so interesting to people 20, 30, 40, 50, 100 years from now.
So on that,
But
you're sort of talking about this really special and a little bit niche dial technique. Through the process of, inventing a pattern and sort of implementing it yourself, have you gained an appreciation for kind of other dials that are out there and do you look at other watch dials and kind of see them in a different light now that you know kind of what's involved? Has there been any sort of like insight or uh, enlightenment that's come along the way as a result of sort of this, this business?
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think it's twofold. When I was just starting, the work of others was sort of magical. Like, how
Yep.
did they accomplish this? How did they do this? And now looking at the other side, having been in the business for a long time, you know, sometimes I'll just take a few hours and just explore other watches out there and other dials and appreciate what they're doing and seeing what I like and just enjoying seeing how other people are expressing themselves through this medium. I've always been a fan of Kari Voutilainen's work and Roger Smith's work. Those are the two watchmakers that are really my inspiration and stand out to me, not just for their dials, but how they run their businesses and how they make their movements is just really inspirational.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and Roger Smith is hiring at the moment, apparently. So anyone listening, if you want to move out to the Isle of Man, you can send your application somewhere.
Yeah.
I think that's really interesting because we've spoken to a few sort of solo or smaller watchmakers recently about that sort of creative process and the way that inspiration works. Like some people are very much drawn from other people, whereas others sort of find it within themselves and like to develop it and not get distracted by trends or things going on in the industry around them. Is that
Mm.
something that you've had to balance? Maybe not in terms of your business practices, but in terms of like building your brand, so to speak.
Yeah, I follow one simple guideline. I like making watches that I like. And if I don't like it, if I don't enjoy it, then I'm not going to make it. And a lot of customers come to me with ideas they want for their watches, and it's a discussion. I learn a lot from them, and I explore different ideas that I wouldn't have explored before. But ultimately, if they're going in a direction that I doesn't personally appeal to me, that's sort of the barometer. That's sort of the barometer. I want something that I'm proud of and that I think is an expression of what I'm trying to achieve.
Yeah, cool.
And that kind of changes over time as well.
That's really interesting. And I guess, speaking of customers, one of your customers, uh, Asher Rapkin, who's a former guest of OT the podcast,
Oh yeah.
also was very enthusiastic when we told them you were coming on. Now, you have done a watch with the guys from Collective Horology. What was that like? And was that an easy decision? Is it something that you look to do more of?
Well, I loved working with Asher
Uh-huh.
and Gabe. Like that was a really, really, really fun experience. Working with meteorite is extremely challenging, but very rewarding. But it was a lot of fun. I really liked working with them. I even worked with them a little bit on this last tantalum release where I let them sell a few of my watches through their
Nice.
platform. Yeah.
Ah,
Can you just go back a second there, because you've just mentioned engine turn meteorite.
Yeah.
So meteorite, it's as I understand it, a very very thin slice of like metal heavy alloy that's famously brittle and fragile. How do you turn that?
Yeah, so it's the meteorite I use is called Gibeon meteorite. It's actually the meteorite you see most often in
Yep.
high end watches, and it's nice for jewelry because it has a nickel content within the iron, so it's a little bit more rust resistant. And iron is dense but kind of soft, and so it engraves. I didn't know if it would when I
Hmm.
started. It was a little bit of an experiment, but it does engrave. And after I've done the engraving on it, it just looks like a piece of iron. And then I put it into an acid etching solution, and that etches away the top layer of molecules, and you get to see all the patternation of the meteorite
mm.
underneath it. And so it's a really neat process. If I let it etch too long, then all the guilloché disappears. And let me tell you, that's pretty frustrating. And if I don't etch enough, then you can't see the meteorite pattern at all. So it's a careful balance.
Cool. It sounds intricate, and again, we'll need to link these watches up for the tantalum especially. Interesting material to go with, and talking to Asher, he sort of indicated that you guys are friends, and he might have a little bit more of the inside lane than Felix and I do on your future plans. But the tagline that in pursuit of perfection,
Mm-hmm.
what does perfection mean to you, and what are you kind of looking to achieve in the long run?
Yeah, so pursuit of perfection to me means that we can't achieve perfection as mere mortals,
Mm-hmm.
but in trying to always do our best, in the pursuit of that, in trying to always better our methods and hone our skills, like that journey is really, really, really valuable. And I feel that trying our best to reach perfection is a very high form of success. That knowing that you left nothing on the table, that you gave it your all, that you tried everything, and that you're continuing to improve is a very deeply fulfilling way to have a career, have a life.
Hmm.
So that's sort of the deep philosophy there. In terms of projects that are coming up, we are working very hard to bring everything in house, everything. So the last release we did tantalum cased watches, and we brought case making in house, which was a huge deal. And uh, for some bizarre reason, possibly clinical insanity, I started with tantalum, which
Hmm.
is uh, a very very difficult material. So we went from working with meteorite, which is very difficult, to working with tantalum, which is really difficult. But we did it. We pulled it off, and we're making some very beautiful cases in California, which no one's ever made a tantalum wristwatch case outside of Switzerland. So we're pretty proud of that. And next up is movements, where we've got a working prototype, and The goal is to make almost every single component of that in-house, minus the springs. And we are full bore ahead on that. And hopefully we'll be releasing some news on that towards the fall of 2022. It's very exciting.
Now, I could be wrong in my thoughts on the movement, but as I understand, you're also not going the easy way with movement, starting off with a simple hand wound or an automatic movement. I've heard talk of a tourbillon as well. Is that true?
Yeah. So we're simultaneously developing just a time only, and we're also going for it. We're doing a tourbillon. They'll most likely have a moon phase with it.
What? Why?
It sounds funny to say it. When you're already making everything, it's not so much harder to go the extra distance and
Throw a
make a
tourbillon in there.
Yeah.
That's incredible, and so I think something that we've sort of talked a little bit about in passing is the fact that you're not doing this in Switzerland. You're doing this, I don't know, in downtown LA. What
Yeah.
what challenges does that sort of location throw into the mix?
It's very different. In Switzerland, the entire infrastructure is there. You
Yeah.
can call up a company and get custom wheels or pinions and place an order and have them delivered to you. And everything's there. Everything's there. In-house means a completely different thing inside of Switzerland because you can design a movement and have all the suppliers and subcontractors fulfill everything for you. So a lot of brands will they'll design a movement and then the parts will come in and they'll finish the parts. Or some brands where there are firms they hire to finish the parts. So however little or much you want to do of a watch in Switzerland, you can do. In the United States, it's different. Where I am is the aerospace industry. So most companies are set up for that. They're not set up for watchmaking. They're not set up for small runs.
Yeah.
So if I want to make watch parts, it's either go to the Swiss or do it myself. But that's always been my goal. It's always been my goal to make my own movement. And now I have a great team of watchmakers and huge investment in machinery. And the Infinity series was to fund this adventure, and now we're almost here.
Very cool. So, who does the movements at the moment?
Yeah, so for the Infinity series, it's a company called Irwin Work Dresden, which is part of Langenhain.
Yep.
It's basically Langenhain making the movements. And they made, over the years, it worked out to 88 movements for me. And they're no longer making movements. They're just making it for Langenhain, which is fine because at some point I needed to stop on the Infinity series so I could focus on the next watch. And as long as I keep having orders for the Infinity series, it's hard to stop and transition. So it's been a great ride with them, and it's an absolutely beautiful, wonderful movement. And working with them has been a joy, and I'm going to miss it, but I'm excited for the next step.
And is the next step your own in-house stuff, or will there be sort of an interim supplier in the middle?
I don't think so. I've been toying with the idea of doing another watch with another movement, and I still may do that, but definitely the next big project is our own movements. Like that's the focus. It's getting these tantalum limited edition watches done, and then completely focusing on the in-house watches. We made a prototype last year and got to a point with it where we felt really confident, and then had to go back to finishing Infinity series just because we couldn't afford to do R&D and pay the bills at the same time. So we feel really good about what we can do once we're all focusing on just making two movements.
You mentioned when we were sort of talking about how the difficulties of not being able to call up your Swiss neighbors and order a couple of parts, being based in LA. Does it go further than that? Like, is there sort of support from like knowledge transfer there? Like, do you have peers or colleagues in Switzerland or other ateliers that you can sort of source bits from or problem solve, or is it quite a you hear it a lot with Switzerland, that closed shop mentality.
Yeah, so thankfully I have a great network of friends all over the world, and I call on that network quite a bit, and we all talk and work with each other. We have a Discord channel full of watchmakers that are mostly based out of Switzerland. I have a mentor here, David Walter, who's from Australia, who's one of the greatest watchmakers and clockmakers in the world.
Hmm.
And he lives a few miles north of me, and I talk with him very frequently. He's the one that gave me my first professional job making dials for his watches as well as clocks. So he's a tremendous resource. Another person I talk to quite frequently is Josh Hacko, which I'm
Uh-huh.
sure you guys are familiar with.
Sure.
Yeah. And, you know, the the watchmakers outside of Switzerland, they're sort of it's almost like we're all helping each other out because our market share is so tiny in comparison to the Swiss. Like we don't really feel like we're competing against each other.
Hmm.
If we take 1% away from the Swiss, we'd all be fantastically wealthy.
Yeah, yeah.
So everyone's there to help each other, which is really neat. Really, really neat.
Well, I mean, on that point, your volume of production ranges from 10 units to 26, I think, for the last run. How are you
Yeah.
managing this demand given the massive success that your brand has seen? How are you dealing with it?
Yeah, so this is a little funny. I was a principal of a high school for
Hmm.
about 6 years, and it's one of the most difficult jobs I think that's out there. Having to deal with teenagers, and worse than teenagers are teenagers' parents.
Yeah.
Uh, so I feel like after 6 years of that, running a watchmaking business is much easier in comparison. No angry parent calls, no detentions, just dealing with people that are very passionate about watches, and both the collectors and my watchmakers are super passionate about what they do. So it's pretty enjoyable, and I haven't found it too difficult. I sort of run things. Um, we went in our first year, we sold about 8 watches. In our second year, about 10, and in the last year and a half, it's been 70. So
Whoa.
there's been a lot of growth, which is great, and we've had to grow a lot and expand, and more watchmakers, more equipment, larger facility. So that's been kind of tricky learning how to navigate that, but I have to say it's been really fun. Like I'm enjoying it. I
And
enjoy coming into work each day.
are you at that point where I think sort of a lot of new businesses get to, where they find that they started doing something, maybe in your case, engine turning dials because they loved it, but then the business gets to a point where all their time ends up being, sucked into administration and media interviews and all that sort of stuff, or are you still getting on the dial machine every day?
The media interviews are really the big problem, especially podcasts.
Yeah, they're the
I can hardly
worst.
get enough.
Fucking drain. Tell
um,
me about it.
yeah. I do enjoy running the business and doing all those aspects of it, but it does make it harder to sit down and make watch dials. But that's still something very important to me, that every watch I'm working on the guilloché on it. And so I make the time for that. Like I have to get all my ducks in a row, and then I'm able to sit and have peace and quiet and uh, work for as long as I can before the next interruption comes.
Yeah, I can imagine what that's like. One thing I did want to ask, with this sort of increasing sort of prominence of your own watches in the past, you've done, obviously the watch with Collective. You also did a really beautiful, or you're involved in a beautiful watch made by Masena Lab and Habring, where you did the dial. do you still plan to do more of that collaborative work, or are you going to be focusing your efforts only on J.N. Shapiro watches?
Yeah, I'm going to be doing more collaborative work, and I'm trying to balance to make sure I don't do too many of those jobs. That is a very tricky aspect. I'm in the time business, and time is the biggest problem. So I do have to be careful. There's a lot of opportunities. Watches are so popular. I could fill up all my time just doing collaborations with other people. So that's something I have to be careful with. So I'm trying to be very selective who I do collaborations with. In the past, I've taken a lot of sort of one-off jobs to do neat projects for collectors or someone
Mm.
that comes to me with an idea. That's probably going to end, unfortunately. But that's what I used to only do, was sort of these one-off jobs. But it's a little difficult with that. You invest all this R&D into doing a one-off project, but then it's just done.
Yeah, yeah.
And yeah, all that time and effort is just for one thing. And that's a quick way to go out of business.
Yeah, I mean, it's not the worst problem to have. It must be not
It's a good
disappointing.
problem.
Yeah, like it must be sort of a little bit sad to no longer be able to do that sort of stuff. But I think moving into the next phase is probably rewarding in its own way. I also wanted to sort of speak to you a little bit and get maybe your particularly qualified, uniquely qualified perspective on this in a way. Education in watchmaking. You sort of hear the adage that in a few years we're going to have a crisis of skill shortage because all the old Swiss watchmakers that are competent at a particular level are going to retire, and we're going to have no one to replace them.
Mm.
Do you think this is true?
Yeah, I think the problem is twofold. I talk with watchmakers all day, every day, and not everyone wants to be a part replacer. But the brands want their watchmakers to be part replacers. In other words, the big giant brands have tens of thousands of watches, hundreds of thousands of watches that they're producing every year. And so they're constantly either having to deal with the assembly of those or servicing of their old watches. And, some watchmakers are fine. They can just sit down and do the same thing over and over and over again. But many, many watchmakers are very creative,
Mm.
and that type of work is awful for them. So that's one problem I foresee is a labor issue in that way. The other side of it is a lot of the watchmaking schools are tied to a specific brand. And so when you graduate that school, you have to go work for that brand for a little bit. And there's some good with that, but I also feel there's a lot of bad with that. One particular brand uh, that I have a friend who he works for them. If he quits working for that brand, they'll hold his degree. So
Ooh.
there's a lot of I feel there's too much mixing of the education and the corporations. That we need to have more watchmaking schools that are just completely independent of the brands. Otherwise, there will be more and more issues as we get farther down the line.
Do you see yourself taking on some apprentices soon to kind of help that cause?
Yeah, so I'd like to be involved in starting up a watch school locally.
Mm-hmm.
Los Angeles, Southern California as a whole doesn't have a watchmaking school. So I've been talking with a lot of people about this idea, and who knows, it may be something I pursue or help out in. I don't know how desirous I am to jump back into being a full time school administrator all over again, even if it is for watches. But I definitely would like to help out with making sure watchmaking is alive and well in this country and other countries as well.
On that, I mean, I'm not sure, where you're at in terms of being an educator slash watchmaker at the moment. Was there ever any crossover? Like, did your students realize that you had this secret identity as a super high end watchmaker? Like, or did you try and keep that really separate?
Yeah, so last year was my last year in education. This school year is the first year where I'm just a watchmaker. But what I would do is I would take some students as apprentices during the summer, and that was a really fun experience. Getting to show students a very like hands-on, very skill-based trade versus high school. It's almost all theoretical. You're not learning an actual skill or trade in most schools unless you're specifically going to a trade school. So that was really neat. That was really fun. And the students did know I was into watchmaking. I never really talked about it, but whether it was students bringing in old watches to show me or asking me to take out links in their new watch band, or I even had one student bring a Frank Mueller Crazy Hours watch. That was really cool
Nice.
and random. But then I also did a STEM class,
Oh yeah.
and I bring in a watchmaker's lathe, and we do a lot of 3D printing. And when they were learning how to model in CAD, I'd show them some of my models for the watches I was making, and I think they really enjoyed that.
Yeah, cool. So at this point, I think everyone has gotten to know you a little bit, Josh, and they're probably a little bit excited about checking out these dials. They've probably got Instagram open, looking at the dials, and everyone's wondering to themselves, 2022 is around the corner. This will be out in 2022. What can we expect from the year ahead, watch-wise, from you? And how do we make sure we're able to secure a piece?
Yeah. On this last tantalum release, we made 26, but I had probably close to 100
Wow.
inquiries.
Nice.
So I've just basically started making an email list, and when the next watch is on the horizon, I guess I'll send out an email blast and go from there. I'm still deeply struggling with how many of these things do I want to make. It's a huge business question. If I make 10 a year, the more Roger Smith model, or 50 a year, Kari Voutilainen model, or how big do I go? How many do we make? What's demand like? And it seems like watches are just gaining in popularity, so it's a really really important question. If we make too many, we may start to hate it. If we don't make
Yeah.
enough, we may go out of business. So these are the questions of all businesses and all entrepreneurships.
Yeah, that must be terrifying because you can't really change that answer too much after you've set on that course.
Yeah.
We sort of I constantly sort of speak to people, typically in that micro indie scene. It's like, yeah, we set this price because it seemed fair, and then 10 years later they're stuck at that price point, and it's not representative of the work involved, or it's that must be a real challenge.
Yes, yes. Price points are a very, 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 very tricky thing. Uh, in this market, it's usually better to go much higher than you think.
Give yourself some buffer. Um,
Yeah.
well, Josh, it's been really, really fascinating talking to you, and I'd highly recommend anyone that has the opportunity to look up a video of some hand engine turning. It's a magical process, and I think it will give you a real visual accompaniment to this chat. We'll probably link one up in the show notes if we can find one. But before we let you go back to your machines, we've got possibly the most important question of the interview, Josh.
Sure.
And it's one that we do not want any watch related answers if possible. What have you been doing to pass your non-work time? Have you been reading anything, listening to an album, watching a TV show, something purely recreational?
Oh yeah. I'm a huge Wheel of Time fan,
Oh,
and
yes.
Amazon just released a whole series on the first book, Eye of the World. So my wife and I have really been enjoying it.
What do you think of it?
Uh, as a purist,
Uh-huh.
they have diverged from the book, which is sacrilegious, but I understand why they did it. And if I can get over that, I'm sure I'll enjoy the series.
Yeah, and maybe we'll have to have this chat offline. But yeah, young Australian actress as a Queen, Andy, who we were chatting about her the other day. I can't remember her name. But yeah, that's a solid recommendation out on Amazon at the moment. Andy's finishing off The Witcher, so we've got high watchmaking and high fantasy covered here on OT the podcast today.
Yep, they go together.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Josh. And we will link up everywhere for people to follow you and sort of find out more about your watches. And it's been a pleasure having you on OT.
All right. Thank you very much, guys. Absolute pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thanks, mate. Felix, what a treat. Thank you, Joshua Shapiro of J & Shapiro, for coming on the show. Thank you, Art of Straps, for sponsoring today's episode. If you want to email us your sponsorship propositions or anything else, otthepodcast@gmail.com.
If you're a former spy that wants to tell us about your watchmaking enterprises, we will definitely not leak it.
Definitely not. Yeah, we promise.
Make sure you join the Discord.
Yeah, Discord exclusive. And if you like OT, subscribe, tell your friends, your neighbors, your sister's brother, spread the word, and we will catch you next time.
Bye-bye.